Hi, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday night when we talk about nutrition, not about the lean life, but things that relate to that, relating to reversing obesity and obesity related diseases. Because really, it all comes down to living your life at your leanest weight. That's when you're going to be the healthiest, and the body does it naturally. Tonight, we're going to talk about fats. I had a participant last week wanted me to get into the fats, the good and bad, and I know there's so much controversy on it. I thought what we would do is we'd start out with the controversy. I'd show you what's on the internet because a lot of times people come to me and they go, oh, I'm supposed to be eating a lot of fat. I'm doing the olive oils. I'm doing the nuts. I'm doing the avocados. Not that that isn't good. And this is the deal, guys. With nutrition, it's not a blanket statement. Well, nuts are good and olive oil. Yeah, nuts are good. Olive oil is good. Avocados are good. Better to have the good fats than the bad fats. But the big missing link is knowing how to balance the macronutrients. That's really where the key is. And how much fats you need in a day, I'm going to show you what the government says, what the, scientists say. It's basically what I say. It's going to be anywhere from 20% to 35% of your daily value. Now, 20% is when you have a certain genotype. We're going to go over that tonight. 35% is probably pretty average for most people. And in grams, well, it depends if you're a little person like me or a bigger person. So if you're a bigger person, you need more calories to get to your leanest weight, right? So even at your leanest weight, you're going to need a certain number of calories. And if you figure 30% of that, it's going to be anywhere from 40 grams to maybe 80 on high end, right? Now, I'm not saying how many calories you eat to be an American, right? That's a lot more. I'm saying when you balance your diet, your body naturally regulates the appetite. The key to longevity, the key to health is really not eating a lot. The problem is if you try to force it, like everybody's doing through fasting, that's a no-win situation because you're going to have triggers. You're going to have appetite triggers. So it's going to be a struggle. Oh, got to fast. And maybe you're okay for like 10 hours of it. But bottom line, the whole gist of this is just learn how to eat. That's what I say. Just learn how to eat. And then once you learn how to eat, we just bring in some of the facts, which is what we're going to do tonight. We're going to talk about fat. So let me take you guys into what we see all the time. So when we're looking at the internet, and that's where I'm going to go, we're going to just pull up some, basic stuff. Let's go to, let's say you pulled something up. Let's see, this is Harvard Medical School, and they're talking about know the facts about fats, which I'm going to talk about the facts about fats tonight. A lot more scientific than they do, but you need adequate amounts of good dietary fat. Well, I totally agree with that. We all need adequate amounts of good dietary fat. That's the key. What's the adequate amount? So you go on this article and you're reading and they say fat helps give your body energy. Okay, yes, it does. Fats and sugars together burn in the mitochondria. That's what creates ATP. Okay, there's truth in there. They don't tell you much else than that. So just the average person reads this, they don't really understand all the implications. They're just reading this. It protects your organs. Well, yes, fat between the organs, that's part of the deal. It supports cell growth. Absolutely. So does all the macronutrients, right? Keeps cholesterol and blood pressure under control. That's correct when you do the good, healthy fats. But if you do an excessive amount of fats, which we're going to talk about tonight because it's all about balance, then it does the reverse for cholesterol and blood pressure. Okay. So the key here is understanding it's not just about good fat, bad fat, it's about balance in understanding some key science. So, just like somebody going on the internet talks about the different types of fats, saturated, unsaturated, just gets really googly gook all about the types of fats, and you're getting all absorbed into that, and saturated so bad. So forget it. Okay, just forget it. Stick with the macronutrients. Granted, sure, saturated fats are probably not as good as unsaturated, but I could pull up a study that shows, hey, saturated fats aren't so bad. It is the total fats you got to really be checking on. So let's look at some other things, facts about fat. And this comes straight from National Health Services. Okay, good old Gov site here. And they talk about too much fat in your diet, especially saturated fats, can raise your cholesterol. Yes, it can, which increases the risk for heart disease. And they talk about a small amount of fat is in this, and there's the big word there, a small amount of fat is an essential part of a healthy, balanced diet. Doesn't tell you anything because you're sitting there going, what's a small amount? A little teeny bit? Am I eating a small amount? Doesn't tell you a doggone thing. And it talks about fat as an essential fatty acid. Yes, so are proteins important, so are fibers important, the macronutrients. We can't do with any one of them. We have to have all of them. Can't do without any one of them. Okay. So fat helps absorb vitamin A and all of it. Yep, fat does that. So everything I'm reading here about fat, you would finish this article and you would think, okay, doesn't tell me a whole lot. I need a small amount. It needs a part of a balanced diet. It again goes into the different types of fats. So let's talk about nutrition. And this is an article. Which one would this be? Let's see. Nutrition and health. I think this is Department of Nutrition. Okay, back to another government site. And they talk about what are fats, explaining their lipids, polyunsaturated, trans fats. They give you all different types of fats. What functions do fats serve? And all of this information doesn't really, I mean, I'm just telling you as a dietitian, I mean, how can I really, would I just give a patient this information? It's a lot of words, just a lot of words on a page because you're trying to get down to the nitty gritty, trying to zero in. And then somebody goes, well, you know, this doctor says you need this, and then this dietitian says this. It is a hog mess. Trying to figure out who's right, who's wrong, and they're all making statements. Nobody's taking you through the biochemistry, which is what I want to do tonight. Okay, so I wanted to show you this because this is what you're seeing. And they talk about the different omega fats, the omega-3 versus the omega-6. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight. And they talk about how much fat should be included in your diet. Here we go. They talk about 20 to 35% right there in highlight of your total daily calories. And a lot of times they're not really just assuming for your leanest weight, right? Maybe average diet. So if you change that into grams, it's going to be anywhere from like 40 to 80, you know, bigger person 80. Sometimes you'll see the government say 50 to 90 because they're thinking they're not really looking at somebody eating their leanest weight, which your body does naturally. But anyways, I just wanted to show you that what I recommend is not a low-fat diet. Now, I'm getting a reputation for that, right? Because I'm trying to spread the news about the different macronutrients. Like I can go on and on about fiber and gut health, which we're going to get into that also later this month. But really, it's all about understanding how those macronutrients work in your world. And it's all about balance. Fat is no different. So let's get into the PowerPoint. I got a lot of really cool sciencey stuff to show you guys. And let me get my... All right. So fats, the good and bad. I thought that was a good title because we're going to talk about the good and the bad. So let's talk about fat in the body, what it does primarily, fat in the gut, how does it affect it there, fat in the blood, and then fat when it actually gets to the tissue. And the several tissues fat goes to and does kind of some funky stuff. One is in the vascular system, the actual arteries. We're going to talk about that. In the tissue, which really mainly we'll talk about muscle tissue because you're really covered in a lot of it. And so when fat accumulates in muscle tissue, it does some things, which you guys know because you've heard me talk about ceramides and the excess accumulating fats that get in muscle and clog up the receptor sites for insulin. But fats that accumulate in the arteries, in the muscle, and fats that accumulate in fat cells. And that's basically it. So fat goes in the bloodstream, runs around there, gets accumulated in certain organs, muscle, fat cells, arteries, those are the big ones. And in the brain too, we'll talk a little bit about the brain. So that's the whole thing when fat gets to the actually designated area. And then there's the fat in the blood that's running around. We'll talk about that. And what happens in the fat in the gut? All right, so let's start with fat in the gut. And I thought this was really good because I try to bring home some key points that I think are going to really impact you, right? I don't want to do word salad, not word salad. I'm not going to do that whole stuff they're doing in there. I want to get right down to the nitty gritty. And I think the nitty gritty with fat is the tie-in with bacteria. So intestinal bacteria and excess fat. When you have a lot of excess dietary fat in your gut, because you're just eating a high fat diet, fried foods, cheese, all the good stuff, right? Olive oil, even if it's healthy, nuts, avocados. So I don't want to just talk about all the, fats that are high in saturated fats. I'm talking about the ones that everybody thinks they're eating that are so healthy for them. When you have an excessive amount of fats, it actually serves as a protective coating for bad bacteria. Kind of strange that it works that way, but a lot of these bacteria, the kind of membrane they have is more protected when it's coated in fat. So you're eating a very fatty diet and it actually starts protecting more bad bacteria. And if you're doing a low fiber diet, you're probably not having a lot of good bacteria being made. If you're eating a lot of fat and sugar, you're contributing to more bad bacteria. And so what happens is it actually causes a dysbiosis, an imbalance of bad bacteria to good bacteria. So I'm going to just kind of read this study here. The influence of a high-fat diet on gut microbiota, that's that gut microbiome, gut bacteria, a driving force for chronic disease risk. And this article did talk about how fat was related to that in relationship to the bacteria. And it says here, excessive consumption of a high-fat diet has undoubtedly contributed to the obesity epidemic. Now everybody's like, okay, wait a minute. I just saw an article that fat doesn't make you fat. And I'm going to agree with that. That really doesn't make you fat. It's the imbalance of fat. It's the imbalance of the macronutrients that make you fat. Okay. So that's kind of a blanket statement, but we'll take it. And it talks about in the second highlighted area, in fact, emerging literature has implicated high-fat diet induced alterations in the gut microbiome and the obesity epidemic. And we've talked about this before. In obese people, what we're seeing is a different gut landscape. It's like, oh, you're overweight, you're certain of obesity. We already know the little gut bugs you're going to have. We already know you're going to have this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. It's kind of strange, but we're seeing that pattern. So it talks about these high-fat diet consumption generally leads to a decrease of certain type of bacteria, which are Bacteroides, and an increase in Firmicutes. Not that I want to get scientific. It's just saying when you're overweight, and typically when people are overweight, it's usually because they are eating a lot of fat, maybe more fat than they need. And it's increasing a certain type of bacteria, some of the bad ones versus the good ones. That's what this is referring to. So they're basically tying the connection to obesity and gut bacteria. And then they're tying that to the driving force behind chronic disease risk. So we'll go into some more studies. And this one talks about bile acids. Oh, yeah, I want to get into this. Because the other implication that happens when you're doing a high-fat diet, and you will see a lot of times people have gallbladder issues, they'll have digestion issues, irritable bowel issues, right? All these gut issues. The connection there is that your bile duct, you have a little organ that's the liver drops in these bile acids that get into the gut and then become bile salts and break up all your fats and digest them properly. It's a wonderful thing. But when you have a lot of bad bacteria in the gut, you may not even know it. It doesn't allow the conjugation of the bile acids to become bile salts so they can just help digest the fats. Basically, what I'm saying is bad gut bacteria affects digestion. Bottom line, because it doesn't allow the metabolic process of those bile acids to do their job. So there you go. A lot of fatty foods can actually cause more digestion issues, more IBS, constipation. So that's the real connection there with the gut. The gut connection with fat is excess fats create digestion issues, create more bad bacteria. And we already know from my other lectures that bad bacteria travels. It can end up in organ tissue, right? It can end up in the vascular system, which we're not talking about that tonight. But I just want to make the connection that the high fat diets in excess does that, right? So, and this is real information, guys, because we're not just going to say good fats, bad fats. How much excess fats, Myrna? I'm going to tell you, I've seen some really bad bacteria with people at 40%. Okay, so when we looked at the articles, they said, hey, we think people should be between 20 and 35. The ones that are 20%, I'm going to tell you why tonight. They have a certain genotype that affects dementia. There you go. So a certain genotype, which you could get tested for, I'm going to tell you which one it is tonight. That means you better have those fats a little lower, okay? Because you don't get good clearance from the brain from fats when you have a certain genotype. So that's where they're getting the 20 to 35%. Typical person, I would say a third of your diet, 30%. That's just kind of a ballpark figure, unless, of course, I get other information from people and I know they have a certain genotype. So this, again, study talks about a diet high in sugar and fat. Surprise, surprise. We know sugar has also implications with the gut. It affects neurotransmission. That means it affects the messages the brain's doing. Not such a good thing. We talked about in the Lean Life program, that's the, if you're new here, that's where my little diet program, I don't like to call it diet, lifestyle program, where I teach you how to reverse obesity and obesity-related diseases. The brain is implicated when it comes to gut bacteria. It actually affects the neurotransmitters that go up and affect your appetite. Here's what I'm talking about. It's not so much appetite like when insulin's imbalanced or you got low glycogen in the muscle and you're just like eating a bag of chips. This type of neurotransmission is more like a palate screw up. You know what I mean by a palate screw up? Palate screw up is when somebody's like, I don't like vegetables. I won't eat that. They're like real picky eaters. They only eat mono foods. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. These bacteria can really screw with your palate where you just don't have the taste for something. Give me somebody who is not a vegetable eater. They can't stand vegetables. Give me 8 weeks. If we can get them back on the vegetable train, all of a sudden they're like, wow, there's not so bad. They actually get a palate for them. That's really key. So your gut bacteria can actually help you develop a palate. Not so much appetite as much. I don't kind of think appetite and palate. I guess they're kind of the same. When I think of appetite, I always think of wanting to eat more food, and palate is just more like being a picky eater. But anyways, this is some great research. I always bring it when I talk about the diet and the gut bacteria. And you can see in the yellow highlight, it talks about the gut microbiota. Metabolites can modulate the host brain through the gut-brain axis. It can modulate that brain. It can make that brain want certain foods, which is craziness, right? The connection here with fat, if you look it down at the next line, a diet with increased amounts of sugar and fat, high sugar, high fat diet, was employed to distribute the host gut microbiota. In other words, it messes with the gut bacteria. And it talks about the administration in green and highlight, the administration of a high sugar, high fat diet induced this gut bacteria imbalance. Now remember, you start getting that off, the bile acids are not conjugating correctly, so they're not able to really become bile salts and help you with digestion. You eat a high fat diet, you kind of feel like, oh, just, I won't say a stomach ache, but just not great, right? Because it's not digesting well. So when we go and talk about high fat in the gut, we're referring to altering the gut bacteria. This affects the digestion, and this also affects the palate. It creates more of these bad gut bacteria that can also travel to other parts of the body. When we talk about high fat in the blood, let's go there next. So I'm going to talk about some genetic carriers, and I'm going to switch to another PowerPoint here. Make sure I can do this. Make sure I get it right. Okay. I'm hoping you're seeing the screen. All right. So we're going to talk about when it gets in the blood. When fat gets in the blood, it has to be carried by a protein. So fat is typically goes from the intestinal tract to the lymph system first, actually. That's kind of, a lot of people don't know that. But it goes to the lymph system. The immune system is where it travels. And then when it gets to the bloodstream, it has to latch on to a protein. So proteins are carriers for fats. And when you get your blood work, they can measure these proteins. And when they know you have a certain protein carrier, they know that a fat's attached to that. And that's when you go get your lipid panel, these different protein carriers. Let me go back here because I think I forgot a slide to show you guys. It makes it a lot easier. So the different carriers are the APOA, that's the HDL, that's the good cholesterol. So when you're looking at your blood work and you see HDL, good cholesterol, that is carried with the carrier APOA. Okay.
Come on.
Then when you have all the bad cholesterols, that's your LDL, and there's a lot of other ones. They just measure your LDL, but there's VLDL, there's lipo little a. These are all the bad guys. These are the bad cholesterols that can go and tear up your artery wall. These are carried on the bus called the APOB. That's the protein bus. And then we got the APOC, and the APODs. Those are just fat carriers that kind of go in between tissue. A, B, C, D, E. Yeah, that's they do down with the alphabetical order. They kind of do that with the lipoprotein carriers. Lipo meaning fat, protein meaning protein, carrier meaning carrier, lipoprotein carrier. So the one that's for the brain is the APOE. And that carrier can have a mutation on it. Now, that particular carrier carries fat through the brain, and the brain does need fat, yes, especially good fats. But when you have a certain mutation on that, you don't clear out a lot of stuff out of the brain. So when the APOE mutation is in the brain, it can actually cause more tall plaques. Interesting. So that means that when you have more of those plaques, that is what dementia is, Alzheimer's. So the APOE is the genotype we test for Alzheimer's. But what's really interesting is that if you know how to eat, you can pretty much get rid of that expression. Okay. So when you think of Alzheimer's, two ways that we talk about can cause Alzheimer's. One is we talk about type 3 diabetes, and that's where the receptor site in some of the brain cells become clogged. Just like the receptor site for insulin in the muscle cells become clogged with too much fat, we have certain neuronal cells in the brain that also have a receptor site for insulin. They get clogged as well. That can be a problem, and that can keep the fat in a dysfunctional way in the brain. And when you have that combined with the APOE, not a good combination. So when I have somebody who has APOE genotype, and it comes in 4 genotypes, and it's the 4 APOE4 that is the one that we worry about. No. So anyway, bottom line, if I have an APO gene and I have somebody who has insulin resistance, not a good thing, not a good combination, right? That's expression for Alzheimer's, dementia. So that's a lot of science. I'm going to come back to it. And actually, I can even do an entire podcast just on this, because I'm going to pull from a podcast I didn't. Okay, Alzheimer's. Yeah, I'm sorry, Alzheimer's disease. I think you might be saying old timers. Well, it's not really old timers, but it's Alzheimer's. Maybe I'm not saying that right. Well, when we mute the mic, then somebody can help me with that. But oops, let me look in the chat just real quick. So does somebody have their microphone on? I think we might be getting some feedback. So if you do, just go ahead and turn it off so that other people don't hear your dog or your kids. Okay, so let's go back to the PowerPoint where we talk about the lipo carriers, because I think this is kind of interesting stuff, because you're looking at your lab work and you're trying to figure out what this means. And I won't drag this one out, but the APOB, and I always try to get somebody to get the APOB. This isn't something your doctor will usually test for. But once I tell you about it, then it's going to make a lot of sense why you would want to get the APOB. This is the carrier, the protein carrier for all the really bad fats. These are all the ones that cause problems in your arteries because these bad fats get in there, they cause plaque, they can cause lesions in the artery wall when they get with the bacteria. So you really don't want a lot of APOB. So it's like APOB is the bus that all the fat guys get on, all the bad guys, bad fat guys. So you've got this bus, and I kind of drew it like that, and you got all these bad fats in there. You got LDL in there, you got VLDL, you got IDL, you got lipo little a. So all these fats are just loading on this carrier and they're going through the artery wall. And these are the fats that get sticky in the wall. These are the fats that cause the plaque in the wall. Okay. Big problem there. So we talk about the APOB, which is a big, big marker for the plaque. If you get only one marker, this is the one to get. Because a lot of times your doctor's only getting LDL, the bad cholesterol. Well, you can ask him to do the APOB. And when this one's elevated, it means a lot of the other bad guys are doing things they shouldn't do. A lot of these bad fats. So how much APOB is ideal? If you've had an event, heart attack or stents, you want to be under 70. Typically, most people are 80. We like to see, ideal would be 80. We like to see everybody under 90. And when I see a patient up around 110 or 120, not a good thing, right? Combine that with some gut bacteria as well. Not such a great idea because it can go in there. That bacteria can get in those artery walls. It causes lesions. That's what bacteria does. Bacteria travels and it affects other parts of the body. And you combine that with the plaque in the artery. That's where you can get the rupturing. So let's talk about the APOE. This is the carrier that's going in the brain, and this is the one that can get, when you have the APOE4. So you can get 2, 3, 4. Those are the genotypes. If you have the APO4, that means you have a mutation on that lipo carrier, and you're not going to do well clearance taking those fats out of the brain, because that's what that carrier does, in and out. And they also show that when you have the APO4, which we're going to go back and look at some studies, that it's more prevalent to get plaque brain, to get these little plaques that can cause part of that dementia. So and let me just go here, because I know I talk about this as well. And the other thing, because I want to kind of tie it all in for you guys, is with the fats in the brain, there's 3 main tissues that have insulin receptor sites. There's muscle tissue that has an insulin receptor site, fat tissue has an insulin receptor site, and brain tissue. Now, last week I talked about sugar, that when you have sugar, a lot of sugar in the blood, because these receptor sites become clogged with fat, leaves a lot of sugar in the blood. A lot of cells don't have a gatekeeper. Sugar can go in and out, and that's where we can get neuropathy, actually cause damage. Everybody says, well, too much sugar is bad. I'm like, look, if you don't have insulin resistance, it's fine, because it's going where it should. It's if you have a lot of insulin resistance and you have a lot of sugar in your blood, it's not a good thing. So how did you get insulin resistance, which is the precursor to type 2 diabetes, and the precursor to type 3 diabetes, which is Alzheimer's? How did you get that? Well, you were eating too much dietary fat, or you're just too fat. So when you're too fat, you start breaking down fats. First thing, this is huge. If you start gaining weight, and I'm talking maybe the threshold, it's really based on body fat, but I'll just throw a number out there. It's probably anywhere from 35 pounds, I've seen some people weigh a little less and they're a little fatter because they don't have any muscle, but let's say 35 pounds of excess fat. That's when you're really going to start to see insulin resistant in the fat cell. That's where it starts. Nobody talks about this. Great study on this that I read. I can share it with you guys. It's kind of boring if you're not into studies. But what they found is that first, what happens is the fat cells become corrupt in the insulin receptor site, because you're eating too many fats, too many dietary fats. So you're starting out with all these dietary fats, or you're just eating too much food, even if it's low fat and you're storing it in your fat cells. But bottom line, these receptor sites on the fat cells actually become corrupt. Now, it doesn't not stop the sugar or any food from coming into the fat cell, because fat cells are just good at storing stuff, fat, protein, whatever. They store excess food. But what's really interesting is insulin resistant in a fat cell, like when you get too fat and you get a little overweight, it makes the fat cell loosey-goosey. What do I mean by that? Well, fat cells are really good at holding on to fat. That's what they do, is they store fat. So they have like this little sugar backbone, and they attach 3 fatty acids. It's a beautiful thing. That's a triglyceride. 3 fats glyceride. That's that little sugar bone. Okay, here's what happens. You get that insulin receptor site a little corrupted because you've gotten too fat, and those triglycerides sort of become unattached. They actually release more fatty acids in circulation. And if you're releasing more fatty acids in circulation, they start accumulating in muscle cells. When these fatty acids start to accumulate in muscle cells, they change properties and they become a certain fat called a ceramide. And these ceramide fats can travel to other tissue and affect the cellular walls, affect signaling. They can even cause cell death. So they can affect the heart muscle, they can affect the pancreas, even contribute to type 1 diabetes. They can affect the kidney. These ceramides are not a great thing to have around. How did we get them? When fats begin to accumulate in non-fat tissue. What's a non-fat tissue? A muscle, it's a non-fat tissue. So when these fats begin to accumulate, these are the fats that are going up there and clogging that receptor site. That receptor site obviously gets clogged, and then sugar doesn't get into the muscle cell like it's supposed to. We've all heard this story a million times. But here's the deal, and what I'm getting to right now is that also goes on in the brain, because that brain can also have these receptor sites as well corrupted with a lot of these excess fats. So if you have a diet that's not, it's high in fat, and let's say you have the APOE genotype 4, so you're the APOE4, and you don't know how to eat because you've never talked to me, so you don't get it. And you're doing this whole avocado thing, which we just read, avocado nuts, you go, girl, you go. That's good for you. I'm not saying they're bad fats, but if you're an APOE4 and you're just not knowing that fats require a certain percentage, you're screwed. Hate to say it that way, but that's what the science tells us. Because if you're an APO4, you should have your fats down around 20%. Because you don't do well. You have a mutation. You don't do well with that carrier, because that's the carrier for the fat in the brain. And when these APO4s get in a brain with insulin resistant, that doesn't turn out well. So therefore, you're going to get a higher risk for dementia. So that's why I always get my patients to do the APOE4 genotype. Why wouldn't I? We live in a society where it's a ton of fat. Right? So I think that would be something they should know, because most people are insulin resistant unless they know how to do what you guys do, which is balancing the diet. And then they get this doggone mutation. So that's when they really got to be watching the diet on the fats. Not that everybody does, but these genotypes do. So that's the whole story on fats in the brain and how that whole thing's carried. Let me go back to the other PowerPoint. So we have lipocarriers. We have little carriers that take these fats around. The big implication there, this is what you see on your blood work, is the APOAs. Those are the good cholesterols. APOBs. So these little bus rides only take the good guys. APOA says, I only do the good guys. And these good cholesterol actually help clean out the bad guys. So that's kind of a good thing. Then the bad guys are on there. And then there's another one. I want to talk about this. Lipo(a). This is another genotype. And this is another gene marker I like my patients to get, because lipo(a) it's kind of like another LDL. And you have to have you either have it or you don't. Okay. We all have some of it, but some people are going to have a lot more mutations of the lipo(a). They're going to have a lot more mutations. So their lipo(a) is going to be higher. I think of Oprah Winfrey's trainer, Bob Harper. He had lipo(a). wrote several books on paleo diet and, talking about all these good fats. That guy had a heart attack in the gym, has a six pack, amazing looking, right? Big fit guy. He didn't know he had a genotype mutation that meant he needed to not eat a paleo diet. He should not have eaten a high fat diet. He needed to eat more plant-based and a lower fat. So, not that I say everybody's got to be 35% or everybody's got to be 20%. I'm saying certain situations warrant certain percentages of fat. But certainly, guys, if you have an APO4, and at least if you're staying at 30%, I'm going to say you're probably going to be fine. Okay. I still get my patients to know it and to watch it. But let's say you're an APO4 genotype, you have insulin resistance, and you're going out to eat at restaurants and you're doing the avocados and the nuts. Big problem. Big problem. Okay. So that's the lowdown on the carrier in the blood. And here's a study. I talk about protein accumulation on fat droplets implicated in Alzheimer's disease. Not old timers, Alzheimer's. Okay. 60% of the brain's dry mass is composed of lipids, which are fats, which play an important role in the brain because we do need fat for the brain, especially the good fats, the omega-3s. But it also helps form those Malon sheaths, but it can also be toxic. Fats can be toxic. And it talks about here in the green highlighted area in the study in the bottom of the page, 5-year long study to better understand and visualize the relationship between that APO4, Alzheimer's disease, and these fat molecule lipids in the brain. And what they discovered is that when that APO4 genotype was there with the fat particles in the brain, because we're all going to have fat particles, that's where we had dysfunction in the brain. And that's where they found some of the plaque. And I think I have a study that, let me see, is it this one that talks about that? Let's see if I can find it. Couldn't find it. I might have forgot to put it in there. Okay. I do have one here on ceramides. I just want to bring this into light because I did explain that. Ceramides, all that is when fats accumulate in non-fat tissue. They're not accumulating in a fat cell because the fat's in a fat cell is beautiful. Fat cells says, I know this guy. I know how to deal with it. But when you have an excess amount of fats accumulating in other organs like muscle, because you're covered in them, excess is the big word here, excess, right? Because you're going to have some fat in muscle, that's fine. But when it's excess, what happens is, and this study talks about it, skeletal muscle accumulates ceramides in obesity. Yeah, because when you start gaining weight and you have a lot of body fat, you're going to be insulin resistant in those fat cells for sure. And those fat cells are going to be loosey-goosey. They're going to be releasing a lot of fatty acids in circulation, just what fat cells do, especially when you have insulin resistance. What this talks about is that they begin to accumulate. We see it in obesity, and it contributes to the development of obesity-associated insulin resistance. There you go. So this talks about ceramide profiling in the green highlight of a high-fat diet fed animals revealed skeletal muscle ceramide content. I just went over that. So they're saying that, yeah, a lot of these excess fats on these mice, we're giving them high-fat diet. Good fats, guys. Avocados, nuts, good fats. These ceramides can be a real problem because they can contribute to heart disease. So there you go. So I just want, and I'm trying to show you the science. And then, we'll go back to the little Harvard study where you were looking at this word salad and you're like, well, what does all that mean? And you would read some of these articles out there on the internet and people walk out of there going, well, I'm just eating olive oil and nuts all the time. That's good fat, right? I'm like, oh my gosh. No. So much science behind that, but that's what's out on the internet. That's what's out there. So anyways, and I also think too, with a lot of people having insulin resistance and diabetes, it's an epidemic. A lot of people have insulin resistance, they don't even know. Fat does not cause an insulin response. So it's where people know they can, if they're insulin resistant or they're having a problem with sugar, right, because they're really all messed up, those insulin receptor sites. So when they eat fat, they actually feel a little better. They don't have that carbohydrate swing. So I think that's where it gets its big publicity. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, well, fat's not so bad. I do a little nuts and then I don't have the crash. Of course, I say let's just learn to eat, because at the end of the day, you can't just take a one-sided approach to diet. It doesn't work that way. You got to educate yourself. So for me, it's like, people that are going to like my stuff, I mean, I get it. Not everybody's going to like my stuff, but people who are going to love what I do are people that are really engaged in their health. And they want somebody to draw the line over, because I don't want to just be up here, oh, like, what am I going to talk about tonight? Let me just pull up some interesting whatever. I want to make it where it's impactful. That when I tell you something, it's impactful because it ties into how you're eating. It's not word salad. It's impactful. And what I'm trying to get through to you guys tonight is, yes, fats are essential, but it's the right balance. It's the right amount of fat. And it's a lot lower than everybody out there has you think. So you go to a typical restaurant, one meal, you could easily be at 70 grams. Okay. You could already be at 30% of your day in one meal. And then you go to the next meal and now you're at 40%. And then you go to the next meal and you're at 45 to 50%. And you're snacking on nuts all day. You get my point, right? So that's where I wanted to bring the science. Somebody had asked me to do that since we did it about sugar. We should be doing it about fat. So here's another, I kind of thought I'd do a study on the healthy approach to dietary fats. Let's see if this is helpful. Because, a lot of times you can read all these studies and they don't really give you the nitty gritty. Like you just get a lot of words and then you walk out of there and you go, okay, I think it meant this, like fat's good for me. So I wanted to show you what kind of hogwash is out there. So I'm going to study healthy approach to dietary fats, understanding the science and taking action to reduce consumer confusion, which quite honestly, I think this actually would confuse somebody more, but you can see for yourself. So they talk about decades of, in the highlighted yellow, decades of dietary recommendations have focused on balancing calorie intake and energy expenditure and decreasing fat, which was all in the 80s and 90s, because they found, oh my gosh, a lot of fat, heart disease. The problem is nobody balanced it, if you want to know the truth. They were just like reducing fat, doing a low-fat diet, but they didn't understand you can't just take fat out, just like taking sugar out. You have to know how those macronutrients work. So reducing saturated fats has been a cornerstone of dietary recommendations. Duh, that's like the meat and the cheese. That's like a duh, right? Like, of course we know that. And it actually reduces cardiovascular disease, because a lot of those fats, those foods that have those fats, by the way, create a bad gut bacteria. I just thought I'd throw that in there. So they create a bacteria called TMAO when you're eating a lot of cheese, meat, and eggs. And that bacteria goes to the artery wall and actually creates lesions. Not a good thing. So that's a bacteria that's caused from eating a lot of saturated fats. But basically what they talk about here is that they say, replacing saturated fats with carbohydrates, specifically refined, that's talking junk food, has no benefit. Seriously, are you guys stupid? Of course you know that. That's like dumb. I look at that and I go, really, let's be dumb. Of course, we know if you're going to do junk food, refined, of course it's going to contribute to cardiovascular disease. You're going to have all that sugar. You're not going to be balancing it. Dumb statement. And this is like a study. So you're kind of depending on it to be somewhat factual and give you something. But I wanted to show it to you. And then they say, while substituting, so don't do the junk food, duh. Don't do the saturated fat, duh. But you can substitute it with polyunsaturated fats. Those are the olive oils and the avocados. Well, of course, if you're going to take out a fat like a cheese and you're going to put one like an avocado, duh, yeah, it's better for you. Okay. And they say that can reduce your risk for heart disease. Okay, but you still didn't give the person a lot of information. You didn't tell them how much. So that's the kind of stuff you see out there. And then they literally leave people with that. Unsaturated fats are better than saturated. Okay. And we find that people do a lot of saturated fats and a lot of refined carbs are going to have heart disease. I'm like, yeah, I mean, really, they must, like, this is dumb because it really doesn't zero in on it. And then they talk about here, and I do want to talk about this. Yet, if you look at the bottom highlighted area, after decades of focus on low-fat diets, many consumers, food manufacturers, and restaurateurs remain confused about the role of dietary fats on disease risk and sources of healthy fats. And you know why? I'm going to tell you why. Because they did this low-fat diet thing in the 80s and 90s, and everybody got fat. Well, why did everybody got fat? Because they did all these low-fat foods, nobody balanced, they were refined, low-fat, and it created a huge imbalance. A lot of sugars in the blood, insulin got all excited and released a lot of insulin, and then they were hungry all the time. So it actually caused an addiction of more sugar. And as they consumed more sugar, then they got fatter. And then now they're back on this. So if you're fatter and you're eating a low-fat diet, you're still going to have a lot of issues. All the ceramides are still going to be happening because you're going to be releasing all these fats into circulation, which I'm going to just throw this out there. Okay, this is like a Myrna Haag hypothesis, meaning, I guess, a little scientific guesswork. So all this intermittent fasting, what really sort of concerns me, and people do it for weight loss, by the way. Nobody's starving themselves because they love to starve themselves. They do it because they believe it's going to curb their appetite. It's going to force them to, when they eat that one meal, it's only one meal. And if they can get there, it's okay. That in itself can cause a lot of balance. They're going to lose muscle tissue because after 24 hours, we've talked about all this. But what's interesting to me is the fatty acid release connection, because a lot of people that are fasting are overweight, quite honestly. And they're releasing a lot more fatty acids into circulation. Now, everybody says, oh, yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, I would say it is a good thing. You do want to get rid of your fats. But if you're not really losing weight to do it, but you're fasting, I'm not so sure that's a good thing. I'm just saying, that's just kind of a Myrna Haag thing. But anyways, we're at the end now. Hopefully you guys got something out of this. I was a little bit all over the place. The point, and I want to bring it home because I want to summarize so it's not all over the place, is when we're looking at fats, fat is essential. We need it. All our membranes are made from fat. It protects organs. It's good for the brain. All these things. Yes, yes, yes. Of course, plant-based fats are much better for you. But if you're eating an excess of even plant-based fats, not so great. The key is there's a balance. There's a certain amount that's ideal. So fat in the gut, to review, breaks down into fat droplets. That's what fats do. And you have the bile, and that's going to help. And you also have some digestive enzymes. But the key here is these enzymes that help break up fats can get destroyed with the bad bacteria. And that can cause a lot of digestion issues, which can then lead to IBS, which then can lead to some other issues with being overweight, more bad bacteria. So in the gut, a high-fat diet can actually disrupt digestion, right, through the bacteria dysfunction and create more bad bacteria. That's when fat's in the gut, when you're eating too much of it. In the blood, fat in the blood, we talked about how that can accumulate in non-fat tissue. That's in the muscle tissue, causes ceramide. It can also clog up the receptor sites. And I should have put in there the APOE. I kind of made a mistake there because I put it in on the, okay. So also fat in the blood is carried with protein carriers, and understanding what those markers mean, because that's your blood work. When you look at the lipid panel, APOA is the good one. HDL, yeah, that's a good one. LDL is always the APOB. And I think the thing I wanted to bring home there is the APOE. The APOE, you can tell your doctor, I wanted an APOE test. It shouldn't be that hard. They should be able to do it. That's the Alzheimer's gene. Why do you want to know that? Because you definitely don't want to be eating a high-fat diet if you have that gene, and insulin resistant. But if you're not eating a high-fat diet and you're balancing, you won't be insulin resistant, so you don't need to worry there. So that's the story on fats, what it does in the gut, certain markers in the blood, And when the fat actually gets to the muscle cell, accumulates, creates a bad fat called a ceramide that circulates, not such a good thing, and excess fat. And fat cells make fat cells more releasing of fatty acids, which we don't want a lot of. So hopefully that brought it home. The participant that wanted to know about fats, let me just take you here. We look at a label. So a lot of people say, well, how do I know what's in food? You can look at a label. It tells you there. So if, let's say you need 50 to 60 grams of fat a day. That's pretty average for most people. This has got 4 grams. I think you're fine. 1 avocado is 22 grams of fat. 1 tablespoon of olive oil is 15. 1 small little serving of nuts is 12 to 15. So if you have half a cup of nuts, 1 avocado, and 2 tablespoons of olive oil, you're probably up around 50 to 60 right there, easily. So even though it's good, the key is too much is not great. And so it goes back to those that are new on this live stream. I teach a course, the Myrna Method Lean Life course. I teach you how to balance the macronutrients so none of this happens. And fat is definitely one of the macronutrients. Understanding at the end of the day, fat, I don't use fat to balance meals, right? Obviously, I'm not going to do that. So when you're doing the Myrna Method, you don't have to use fat to like I use protein and fiber to balance everything. That's how I correct everything. Fat to me is like, just check it out at the end of the day. Just make sure you're not like overdoing it. So if you choose to have avocado and olive oil for lunch, okay, it's like a bank account. All right. You're up to $30. Good for you. Now, can you do another $30 for dinner? Maybe. Because maybe 60 is you're right where you're okay. But you got to know that. That's the key. You got to be able to know that macronutrient to make sure you're not really overdoing it on that one. Because that's the one that's going to cause some of these other issues. Okay, guys, I wanted to leave it open. I'm going to change the mic. So I have a question here. If you have a patient with Alzheimer's disease, could you clean up the plaque to treat the disease with diet? I am so glad you asked that question, because I would not have thought to talk about that. That's why questions are really good. So let's talk about that. If you have Alzheimer's disease, I'm going to go back to my other PowerPoint. Okay. So this is what's really interesting about diet. A lot of times the diet you should be on is either to prevent a disease or because you have a disease. So we're going to use this as an example. If you have Alzheimer's and you have a lot of these receptor sites in the brain clogged up. So let's look at this Alzheimer brain. We're going to blow this thing up. And let's just assume that we've got a lot of this all junked up. This isn't working like it should. So once you have the Alzheimer's, you've got a lot of the plaque. What they find is that when they give them sugar, they don't have a good response to it. So people with Alzheimer's, when they're given a diet that has, because remember, a lot of them will have type 3 diabetes, they have this clogged up. I would also check to see what their glucose is, to see what their A1C is. This means that they're not going to do well with carbs. They're not going to do well with carbs. So a lot of times with Alzheimer's, when they have sugar in their diet, they don't do well because they have a problem with sugar. They have a problem with sugar because fat caused it. The problem with Alzheimer's is the scarring is already there, especially if they have that APOE4. They've been eating fat their whole life. Nobody told them. And whenever you have the 4 genotype, it's going to create more of this plaque, especially combined with a high-fat diet. So, but they also have a sugar problem as well, right? Because they don't tolerate it. So typically what we see with Alzheimer's, they don't do well. They don't do well on a sugar diet because they already have the disease. And so sugar, they don't handle it well. But yeah, I mean, I don't think, to me, Alzheimer's, I'm still into balancing. I would say find out what kind of genotype if you get a chance, but I feel like I would just keep them at maybe 25% fat. I would just balance their diet. I mean, it's really simple. I mean, we've heard about balanced diet before, but nobody really knows what that means. I don't know if that's helpful, but I wanted to just address the issue that with a lot of studies, we find, and that's where it's coming from, that a high sugar diet does not do well with Alzheimer's. And it's because they've already caused this dysfunction. So I thought I mentioned that. But anyways, did that answer? If that, hopefully, let me figure out, I'm going to do this mic thing here so I can unmute everybody's mic. All right. I'm on the fancy stuff. So I have to make sure I do this right. Person, let's see if I did it right. Okay. I think I'm good. I think you guys, if you want to, Dr. Alzheimer was a physician. Thank you, Louise. Of course, she knows that. She's a school teacher. She's really smart. Okay, awesome. Thank you. I want to leave it open for you guys because I love that you can undo your mic and just talk. I'm a talker person, so I always think other people want to do that. You don't have to. You can leave it in the chat. But I wanted to give you the opportunity to just let it rip. You will have something to say. You want to ask me a question. Awesome.
Hey, Myrna, if you have someone with that, I work with a lot of clients that don't have a gallbladder, and I've found that they don't do very well at 20% fat. They do, and especially if they're obese and they're there to lose weight. And they usually, what I notice is they don't get reflux at like a 25%. And I was just wondering if you had any feedback or maybe a different direction I might be able to think on that.
Are you saying that your experience, so McKenna's the dietitian, so we'll tell everybody that. So this is like good talk. She got 2 dietitians talking this stuff. So are you saying your patient you're finding better results with a 20% diet of fat?
They're not getting reflux.
Right.
If they're at 25%.
Right. Yes.
We can still help them lose weight at the higher rate, but I find that if they have the stomach acid that's high and the bile acids that's high, they're really suffering. And when you bump that up, but I didn't know if fiber could also bind to bile acids and
no, it's really what I have found, McKenna, it's a bacteria problem. Okay. So what's really interesting is she has a patient that and I'm, everybody's removing their body, I don't know what's up with that, but when you're looking at bile acid, it really is sensitive to bacteria in the gut. So if somebody's obese, we pretty much know they probably have some bacteria they're not balancing. So they're going to have indigestion. They don't have a gallbladder because they removed it. So they're going to have a problem breaking down fats for sure. Okay. And then if you tie that in with gut bacteria, they're going to have a digestion problem. So I would recommend some digestive enzymes. If you get with me afterwards, I'll get you with a good, and because I'm going to do a podcast on this in a couple weeks, and I'm going to actually have somebody in to speak on digestive enzymes, to help with that, because that's the problem. They can't digest their food because they've got this bacteria. Also, I would end up just doing what you're doing. I would keep them at 20 to 25% of their diet fat, but you have to balance them, right? Because when they're doing a low fat diet, if they're not balancing the carbs, right, we know what's going to happen. So, and they're insulin resistant. So you got to really make sure to bring that protein and fiber in the equation so that they're not letting the carbs get out of control and causing all this blood sugar issue in the bloodstream. But good question. What is the best way to add more protein? For me, because I'm super busy, is I really use a lot of protein powders. When I drink my coffee in the morning, I usually do a latte, which is a lot more almond milk than coffee, but I always throw a half a scoop of protein powder in there just to kind of bump up my protein. I'm adding protein powder in things a lot of times just to make sure I'm bringing it up. So a good source of protein is, I think, I tend to think more plant-based. So I like the tofus. I like the beans. You've got the lean. The thing about animal protein is you don't need a lot. So you could have 3 ounces of chicken and be at 21 grams of protein, which is a lot. What is an ounce of chicken? A thumb. A thumb. That is an ounce of chicken. And if you have 4 thumbs, you have a palm. And that's going to be about 25 or 26 grams of protein, 1 palm. So doing animal protein, you just don't need a lot, right? So that's kind of the good news. Plant-based proteins, you need a little more. If you're only plant-based and you're only eating protein from plant-based, you're not doing any animal, then you need a little more protein because it's not as bioavailable. Still good stuff, still quality, but the body has a harder time getting to the protein from a bean than it does from an egg. It just means you need a little more. How much more? Maybe 20 grams more a day if you're a vegan. Not a lot. It's not a lot. That's like a cup of beans. Okay. So I thought I'd mention that. Do you have a plant-based protein powder you like? Yeah, I like Vega. And, I always tell people, buy the little sample packs because sometimes I'll tell people, oh, yeah, I love that one. Some people love Orgain. I think you go to the health store, you buy one of those sample ones, see if you like it so you're not investing in the whole thing. I definitely do the vanilla flavor. No way I like it unless it has vanilla. Can't do the plant-based proteins without a vanilla taste. And I do think Vega vanilla is pretty good. I just personally. Okay, good questions. 1 cup of chicken. Oh, thank you. Actually, beautiful, Karen. Karen is our food coach. You want to get on if you're on the Myrna Method and you're into my app. She's awesome. She helps you balance your food. She's created a lot of really good recipes, guys. If you haven't seen them, you need to go on there and get them. Okay, 1 cup of chicken bone broth is 10 grams of protein. And it's like, I think 1 gram of fat. So to use the chicken bone broth, and I think, which I can't think of what brand is it, Publix. Good. Yeah, because that can be something you're throwing in soups. You can you can do an Instapot recipe, throw in some bone broth, and you got your protein and you got your beans and vegetables all in one. Great. Love it. Nutritional yeast is another one. That's got 4. So 1 tablespoon of nutritional yeast is 4 grams of protein, which is a lot. Is a lot because that's only 1 tablespoon. 365 vanilla at Whole Foods. Very good. I forgot about that one because that one does taste good. So Louisa's telling us the market at Whole Foods Market, 365. That's what it's called, 365. Vanilla, unsweetened, soy protein powder, 24 grams of protein. That's a winner. So 24 grams of protein. Think about that. So yeah, I think the protein powders help bump me up all the time. Sometimes I'll make like little cookies in my air dryer and I'll use my air fryer and I'll do protein powder, oats, and banana with some almond milk. I mean, like they're little patties. My husband calls them cow patties, but I don't know why they don't look like cow patties, but they're great because they get me through the day. And all I've done is just add some protein powder with some oats and fruit, a little bit of almond milk and some salt to flavor it, cinnamon. And that's like a little cookie that I can eat through the day, but I get to control the amount of protein I put in that. So it's awesome. Awesome. Anyways, any other comments? I love the comments. Like I said, if you want to unmute your mic, totally good with me. So if we don't have any other comments.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
You said something so amazing just a few minutes ago. You were well, actually, it was something that McKenna, I believe, brought up about her clients who have lost a gallbladder or whatever. I have not, but I've always had digestive problems. And I have a hiatal hernia, and that doesn't help anything.
Right.
But since I have been on your method, I am the most comfortable.
Right.
I have been ever.
Right.
I used to have to take a lot of lot of pills that I was for a time on digestive enzymes, but not for the most part. I was I would just have to have acid blockers and those kinds of things to deal with reflux. I just don't have that anymore.
Yeah. And a lot of reflux does start with some gut bacteria. So here's the deal. Your gut's healthy because if you're on my program, you're also balancing, which means you're bringing in the fibers, which means you're taking down the fat. So you're not having that fat in the gut, which makes more bad bacteria. So these bacteria, which is why I really wanted to bring that connection tonight, it affects digestion. The bad bacteria affects digestion, which then leads to reflux, which then, it's like this domino effect. So yeah, it's amazing. And people have their gallbladders removed and they don't even understand that they don't digest fat well. And then if they have gut bacteria on top of it and their gallbladder removed, that's why McKenna, when she's treating patients, is finding, I put them on 25% fat diet, 20 to 25%, and I get a lot better results, right? Because it actually, so you will have better digestion. So if you have a lot of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, you get a lot of that going on. Sometimes you really do have to take those digestive enzymes. And I'm going to do a podcast on that because I think that's really worth talking about. But here's the deal. Once you clean up your gut, right, and get rid of all the bad bacteria, your digestion goes back, right? Your enzymes will start working again. So a lot of times if somebody has really bad gut issues, I'm going to give them those digestive enzymes, get them really pumped up on that so that I can help them get their food digested. And then hopefully bringing their gut back. You get on antibiotics, certain medications, stress. That was the other thing when I talked about gut bacteria. I think it was a couple podcast or live streams before. Bad emotional garbage can create bad bacteria. Yeah. And that can cause digestion issues. So all really good. Let me check the chat. Thank you. Thank you guys. Awesome. Awesome. Great comments. I appreciate it. So any other questions? Love them. Love them. Great comments. I think a lot of people love hearing other people, talk and kind of share. So feel free. And I'm checking the chat.
Thank you so much, Myrna. We always learn a wealth of knowledge from you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. All right. No more questions. I will see you guys next week. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Love you. See you later. Bye.